The house was still, the kind of quiet that crept in without warning, settling between the rooms like an unwanted guest. I had lived in this house for years, and though it had always been filled with noise, dinner table conversations, the hum of the washing machine, the radio playing softly in the background, it was different. Now, the silence between us, between Lila and me, felt like something tangible. Something I could reach out and touch. I had always respected her, even admired her. Lila was the epitome of grace. Her smile, warm and kind, hid a sharp mind and an even sharper will. She had managed to weave herself into our family with ease, taking on the role of the perfect wife to my father, the perfect mother to me. But over time, something had changed. The sparkle in her eyes began to dull, and the warmth of her smile seemed forced, like a mask she wore to shield herself from the reality of her own dissatisfaction. It was then that I started noticing the small things, the subtle glances exchanged between her and Mark, the late-night phone calls, the days when she seemed distant and absent. Even when physically present, I never questioned her outright, I simply watched, carefully, as the pieces fell into place. I didn't know exactly when it started, or when I had begun to piece it all together. But I knew something had been lost between them. My father, who had always been so caught up in his work, never seemed to notice. Or perhaps, like me, he simply chose not to. It wasn't until one evening, as I sat quietly in the living room, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, that Lila's voice broke the silence. She had come in, her face drawn with a mix of sadness and something else, something I couldn't quite name. "I've been thinking about it for a long time," she began, her voice soft, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "And I think you should know. Love. It has a quieter name than what you think." I didn't understand what she meant at first. I stared at her, waiting for an explanation, but she only stood there, her eyes not meeting mine. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way she said it. There was a weight in her words, a heaviness that seemed to sink into the very fabric of the room. Lila's words lingered in my mind, heavy and incomprehensible. I didn't know what she meant by love having a quieter name. It haunted me, stayed with me during every meal, during every conversation, as if it were an invisible presence in the room. The house continued its rhythm, but there was something different in the way we moved around each other. My father, always busy with work, never seemed to notice. He still smiled at Lila, still told her he loved her at the end of each day. But his words seemed more like a routine, a gesture he did because it was expected of him. He had stopped looking at her the way he used to. The longing in his eyes was gone, replaced with something like resignation. Lila, on the other hand, seemed to have become a ghost in her own home. She cooked, cleaned, and smiled, always smiling, but there was a hollowness behind it. I could see the way her eyes would glaze over when my father spoke to her, how her smile would falter when he wasn't looking. I could see the subtle way she pulled away when he tried to hold her hand. It was subtle, so subtle that my father didn't seem to notice, but I did. And there was Mark. I had seen him a few times, always at odd hours. He was someone I didn't know, someone I didn't think much of. But now I started seeing the way he would send Lila messages. How she would smile when she saw his name on her phone. One evening, I came down the stairs to find Lila alone in the kitchen, staring at her phone. She quickly put it down when she saw me. I pretended not to notice, but something in her eyes told me she had been caught. Even though nothing had been said, the unspoken truth was growing in the silence between us. I didn't need words to understand what was happening. I could see it, feel it. Lila had stopped loving my father the way she once did. And it wasn't just that. She was looking for something she couldn't find at home. The shift had been gradual, so gradual that it was hard to pinpoint exactly when it happened. One day, everything seemed fine, and the next, the cracks were visible. I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all, the betrayal, the secret. The love that had faded without either of them saying it out loud. I tried to talk to my father about it, but the words never came. Every time I opened my mouth to confront him, something stopped me. Perhaps I was scared of the truth. Perhaps I wasn't ready to face the devastation of it all. But the more I watched, the more I realized that nothing could be done to stop it. This was the reality we were living in now, and all I could do was watch as it slowly unraveled. One night, everything came to a head. I was in my room, trying to focus on my homework, when I heard raised voices downstairs. I recognized my father's voice, sharp and frustrated, and Lila's softer but unmistakably defensive tone. I tried to block it out, but curiosity pulled me closer. I slowly crept down the stairs, keeping my steps light until I reached the landing. I could see them from where I stood, Lila standing near the kitchen counter, her hands pressed against the marble, and my father pacing back and forth, his face red with anger. "You don't even care anymore, do you?" My father's voice broke through the silence of the house. "It's like we're living in two different worlds, Lila." Lila stood still, silent for a moment, before she responded. "I don't know what you want me to say, John. I've tried for years, but it's just not enough anymore. It's never been enough." I watched from the shadows, unsure if I should make myself known. Unsure of how to process what I was hearing. My father's face tightened, and his eyes, usually filled with some kind of silent affection for her, were now full of bitterness and hurt. "Is it Mark?" he asked, his voice strained. Lila didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down at the floor, her gaze unfocused. And I could feel the weight of the moment. She was avoiding his eyes, her expression guilty but resigned. "You don't understand, John," she finally whispered. "There's something missing, and I thought I could find it elsewhere. Why didn't you tell me?" My father's voice cracked. "Why couldn't you just tell me the truth? Why let it go this far?" Lila took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say what she had been holding back for so long. "Because love has a quieter name than what we think. It's not always loud and clear, John. It's not always what we expect it to be." I felt my stomach turn as I listened to her words. There it was again, a quieter name. What did that even mean? Was this all her way of justifying what she'd done? Was she trying to excuse the affair, trying to explain away the pain she had caused? "I don't even know who you are anymore," my father muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't recognize you." Lila looked up at him then, and there was something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. It was sadness, regret, but also something deeper, something darker. "I don't know who I am either," she admitted softly. "And maybe that's the problem." There was a long silence. The words they hadn't spoken for so long hung heavy in the air. My father stood there, his back slightly hunched as if the weight of the conversation had broken him, and Lila, standing so still, almost as if waiting for something to change. I couldn't watch anymore. I turned quietly, retreating to my room. But the sound of their voices still echoed in my ears. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, replaying everything I had just overheard. I kept thinking about Lila's words. Love has a quieter name. What did that mean for us? What did that mean for the family we used to be? It was clear now, more than ever, that something had died between them long ago. It wasn't just the affair. It was everything, the years of silence, the years of pretending. The years of love that had slowly withered and vanished. And now, there was no going back. The following days were a blur of quiet, strained interactions. My father left early every morning, his briefcase in hand, and didn't return until late in the evening. Lila, as usual, kept herself busy with household tasks. But there was a noticeable distance between us now. She had always been warm and kind, but now she was a stranger. And I was just as lost as she was in the emptiness of our shared space. I found myself avoiding her, not knowing how to face her after hearing the truth. She seemed like a woman who had given up, but not just on my father, on herself as well. It was in the way she moved through the house, like a shadow, performing the duties she had once done out of love but now did out of habit. She no longer smiled when she saw me. She no longer tried to engage in casual conversation. The air was thick with something I couldn't name. One evening, as I sat in the living room flipping through a book, I heard the door open. My father was home early. I looked up, surprised, but before I could say anything, I saw him walking toward the kitchen, his expression weary. He stopped halfway there, as if he were contemplating whether to enter or not. The decision was made for him when Lila stepped into the hallway from the kitchen. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe resignation, maybe even love, but it was gone almost instantly, replaced by the familiar walls they had built between them. Lila spoke first, her voice soft but clear. "You're home early." "I had some work to finish," my father said, but it sounded more like an excuse than the truth. "Lila, we need to talk." Her face softened, but only for a moment. She nodded slowly, as if bracing herself for the conversation neither of them wanted to have. I stayed where I was, trying to remain invisible. I felt like an intruder in my own home, caught in the middle of a war one had no part in starting. They had tried to shield me from it for so long, but now the truth was out in the open. And it was suffocating. I couldn't hear the words they exchanged after that. I wanted to leave, to walk away and pretend I hadn't witnessed any of it, but I stayed frozen. I felt like a ghost in my own life, disconnected from everything around me. It wasn't until later that night, after they had both gone to bed, that I realized something had changed. My father was no longer hiding from the truth, and neither was Lila. There were no more pretenses. The love they had once shared had quietly died, and nothing could bring it back to life. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Lila had tried to explain her actions with the phrase, "Love has a quieter name." But I didn't know what it meant. Was it an excuse for her betrayal? Or was it simply the painful truth about the kind of love that had faded between them? And if love had a quieter name, then what did that say about me? What kind of love did I have? Could I ever trust in it again? The next morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, I sat in the kitchen with my father. He was sipping his coffee, his eyes tired, as if the weight of the past few days had taken its toll. He didn't speak to me, and I didn't speak to him. The silence between us was thick and heavy. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked quietly, breaking the silence after a long time. I looked at him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the vulnerability in his eyes. He wasn't asking if he should stay for Lila, he was asking me. And in that moment, I realized that we were all lost. I don't know, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know what any of this means anymore. And neither did he. There were no answers to the questions we were all asking. There was only the quiet, unspoken truth that love wasn't always what it seemed. That it could fade and break in ways we didn't understand. It had a quieter name, and sometimes that name was silence. The days stretched on, and the house, once full of life and noise, now felt like an abandoned place, as if all the warmth had been sucked out. I woke up every morning to the sound of silence, to the dull thud of footsteps as my father prepared to leave. Lila, too, had stopped trying. She moved about the house, doing what was expected of her. But there was nothing in her actions, in her eyes, that told me she was still invested in anything. I noticed Mark less and less, but his presence still lingered in the corners of the house. In the messages Lila would delete before anyone could see them. It was as though the affair, once so vivid, had faded into something more comfortable for her. Like an old sweater she no longer wore but couldn't bring herself to throw away. I didn't ask her about him anymore. What was the point? The truth was already out there, like an open wound no one dared to address. I couldn't decide what hurt more, the affair or the years of silence that had led to it. My father's resignation, his quiet acceptance of the growing distance between them, had made me question everything I thought I knew about love. And Lila's cold detachment, her inability to even try to repair what she had broken, was a bitter reminder that people don't always fight for what they want. They don't always fight for love. One afternoon, my father came home unexpectedly early again. I was sitting in the living room, lost in my thoughts, when I heard the door open. I didn't expect him to be there. But his presence in the doorway felt so out of place now that I couldn't help but look up. He walked toward me slowly, his face drawn with the weight of something unsaid. I didn't move, didn't say anything. We both knew what was coming, but neither of us had the courage to speak first. It was as though we were both waiting for the other to make the first move, to acknowledge the truth that had been hovering between us for weeks. I can't do this anymore, he said quietly, breaking the silence. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was agreeing with him or just afraid of what he might say. Next. I'm leaving, he added, his voice shaking slightly. It's not just Lila, you know. It's everything. I've been thinking about it for so long. And I think I've finally realized it. I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time. And neither is she. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't speak. Couldn't form the words that would explain how much this moment had been building. How much I had seen this coming. My father's words weren't a shock. They were just the final admission of something we had both been avoiding for far too long. He turned to leave, but then stopped, glancing back at me. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. And just like that, he was gone. I didn't try to stop him. I didn't chase after him, didn't beg him to stay. There was nothing left to say. The house, already a hollow shell of what it used to be, became even emptier in his absence. The next few days passed in a haze. Lila stayed quiet, moving through the house like a ghost. She never mentioned my father's departure. She never spoke about anything, really. I stopped expecting answers from her. There were no words left to say between us. And there would be none to fill the space he left behind. I spent more and more time outside the house, walking the streets aimlessly, trying to outrun the weight of everything. I went to the park, watched the sunset, sat by the river, and felt the silence wrap around me like a cold blanket. There was no more pretending. No more illusions of a perfect family, no more lies about love. It was all gone. And then, one evening, as I was sitting on the porch, looking out at the empty street, Lila came outside. She stood at the door, her eyes fixed on the ground, her hands clasped in front of her. "I don't know what to do anymore," she said, her voice barely audible. "I don't know who I am without him." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in weeks. And I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't just sorry for the affair. She was sorry for everything. Sorry for the life she had built. Sorry for the love she had allowed to fade. But the thing was, I didn't know if I could forgive her. Not anymore. I didn't answer her. There was nothing to say. Nothing could change what had happened. Love, it seemed, really did have a quieter name. And in that silence, everything we had once been slowly crumbled, leaving only echoes. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the quiet name of love, the one Lila had spoken of. And for the first time, I realized what it truly meant. It wasn't just a whisper of affection or a soft touch. It was the silence that followed the loss. It was the hollow space where love used to live, where it used to thrive, and now it was just a memory. And maybe that was the cruelest part of all.